Well, good morning, everyone. Now, it would be remiss of me this morning to stand here and not to mention Billy Graham. It would be wrong of me not to do it. I stand before you today simply because of the preaching of Billy Graham. On the 5th of June 1991 at Celtic Park, I heard the gospel of Jesus Christ and I was convicted of my sin. And I prayed that sinner's prayer along with thousands of others that night. And I was forgiven. It was a simple message, but a message that turned my life and tens of thousands of others like me around. It turned my life around. Let me quote to you what Billy Graham once said. Someday you will read or hear that Billy Graham is dead. Don't you believe a word of it. Don't you believe a word of it. I shall be more alive than I am now. I'll have just changed my address. I have gone into the presence of God. And I thank God for Billy Graham. I thank him. So, this morning is our second in our series in our hills and walks of the mountains in the Bible. Now, last week we saw how God used Moses to rescue the nation of Israel from the slavery of the Egyptians. For 400 years, the Egyptians had treated them badly. The Jews cried out to God, and God heard their cry. On Mount Horeb, it was on Mount Horeb that God called Moses. And we saw how God was always there in Moses' life, from his rescue by Pharaoh's daughter to his apprenticeship with Jethro's flock, and of course through his conversion too. From all of this we see the hope of Israel, but not just the hope of Israel. Through time we see the hope of the whole world also. Through the whole world also, to the hope of the whole world also. In part of the passage that we read last week, we see a man with whom it all started. The man whom the nation of Israel came, and that man was Abraham. So today, we're going to go back some 300-something years before Moses. We're going to go back to Abraham's calling. And more importantly, we will look at his obedience to God. We will look at his obedience to God. We saw last week that Moses was 80 before God called him into his ministry. Well, Abraham wasn't much better. Well, he was 5 years better. He was 75 before God called him into his ministry. Well, remember how we spoke at length about Moses' apprenticeship? Well, he obviously wasn't the first when it comes to long apprenticeships, that's for sure. But before we go any further, it's only right and proper that we read God's word. So please turn to Genesis 22. I think Gordon's going to put it up on the screen for us this morning. So Genesis 22. I'm reading from the ESV this morning. Genesis 22, verses 1 to 19. And if you're reading from the ESV, it's entitled The Sacrifice of Isaac. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham! And he said, Here I am. And he said, Take your son, your only son, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you. So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship, and come again to you. Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son, and he took it in his hand, and he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together, and Isaac said to his father Abraham, Father. And he said, Here I am, my son. He said, Behold, the fire and the wood, but where's the lamb for the burnt offering? Abraham said, God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son. So they went both of them together. When they came to the place which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order and bound Isaac his son and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand, took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called out to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham! And he said, Here I am. He said, Do not lay a hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, The Lord Will Provide. As it is said, to this day on the mount of the Lord it shall be provided. And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of the heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice. So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. And may the Lord bless the public reading of his word. Now, I hope to cover three things this morning. We're going to look at three things this morning. Test, obedience, and faith. Test, obedience, and faith. Like last week, it will do us no harm to do a quick overview of how Abraham got to where he got. And we have to go all the way back into Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. Let me read that to you. It's important that you hear this. Now the Lord said to Abraham, Go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse. And in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed. A great nation is going to come from him. Indeed, all families shall be blessed because of him. Now, it's worth noting, so please bear in mind that Abraham is 75 when this happens. His wife is 65 years of age. So as childbearing goes, and please excuse the vernacular, she's a bit past it. They have a childless marriage. Nonetheless, off they go. They're also joined by Lot and his family. And as a group, they come across issues and situations in chapters 13 and 14. And at one point, Abraham has to go and rescue Lot because Lot and his family have been kidnapped. Now we come to chapter 15, and we see Abraham question God. Remember chapter 12, God tells Abraham that a great nation will come from him. But Abraham questions the fact that him and Sarah are still without an heir. Still without an heir. In fact, Abraham's right-hand man will take over his estate when he dies. He'll take over his estate when he dies. Let me read chapter 15, verses 4 and 5 to you. And behold, the word of the Lord came to him. This man shall not be your heir. This is his right-hand man that I was talking about. Your very own son shall be your heir. And he brought him outside and he says, Look toward heaven and number the stars. If you're able to number them, then he said to him, So shall your offspring be. This is a reiteration of the promise already made to Abraham. So, already within Abraham's life, faith is very prominent, or should I say, lack thereof. I should say lack thereof. And we see that in chapter 16. On Sarah's instruction, Abraham then sleeps with Hagar, the slave girl, in the hope that she produces a son. Guess what she does? She does. Now remember, Abraham's been told by God that he will provide an heir, yet Abraham and Sarah don't seem to be very trusting here. Real lack of faith and trust in them here. Remember what I said last week? God is not in our kind of a hurry. God is not in our kind of a hurry. In chapter 17, Abraham is told that Sarah will produce a son. Let me read it to you as well. I will bless her and moreover, I will give you a son by her. I will bless her, and she will become nations. Kings of people shall come from her. Another reiteration. What are you doing, Abraham? Listen to me. To cut a long story short, at the age of 100, Abraham becomes a father to Isaac. Sarah's now 90 years of age. As I read to you, as I said to you, God is not in our kind of a hurry. And again, we read that in Habakkuk 2 and 3. God acts just at the right time, absolutely at the right time. When it's perfect for us, that's when he acts, not before. Let me be clear here as well. Abraham's son by Hagar is by man's will, a natural man-made occurrence. His son by Sarah is a supernatural event, not man-made, but the pure will and promise of God. Plain and simple. Plain and simple. Isaac's birth is in chapter 21, and by chapter 22, which is the focus of our attention, some 30 or so years have passed. So now to our passage today, and to our first point. If you want a test in your life, then this is it. Make absolutely no bones about it. This is a test. But man has always pushed him or herself to the limit. I have a friend who was an officer in the armed forces, now works for another government department. And he worked within military intelligence. He worked in counter-terrorism, the nasty stuff, the horrible stuff, the face-to-face stuff. But his goal was always to be an intelligence officer in our most famous of our special services, our special forces. Now, this requires a battery of tests. Part of which was being put out in the field and had to evade capture. He was caught. They were all caught, of course. But see, now the test came. This is where he was physically abused and mentally tortured. He hadn't eaten for 4 or 5 days and definitely not slept for 4 days. They tempted him with food. They preyed on his carnal weaknesses. They even used the death of a close friend in teenage years to try and break him. Nothing was off the table. Everything goes in war. I saw the boot marks in his body where they'd booted him black and blue. And they booted him black and blue. I saw the fist marks in his back where they punched him. I saw the hands, the trace of someone's hand in the person's wedding ring on his back where he hit him, where he was hit. But he passed the test and he was selected for our special forces. J.G. Baldwin says this: people may subject themselves to extreme conditions in order to prove their capabilities. And Scripture reveals that testing is part of God's education of his children so that they may come to maturity. Let me read to you James chapter 1, verses 2 to 4. Count it all joy, my brothers, when you meet trials of various kinds, for you know that the testing of your faith produces steadfastness, and let steadfastness have its full effect, that you may be perfect and complete and lacking nothing. If you think my friend's testing is extreme, then you've seen nothing yet. You're about to see testing to the absolute extreme. We're going to see a man and a son pushed to the limit, not physically, but their faith pushed, tested like never before. And as we move into the passage, let me make one thing very clear and unambiguous. This is a test for Abraham. God's not putting any temptation in his way. God will not use evil to test anyone. Let's make that clear. Jesus' brother, whom letter we have just read, his brother James, tells us this very own fact a few verses later on in chapter 1, in verse 13. And he says this, if I can find it. Let no one see when he is tempted and being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted with evil, and he himself tempts no one. God is righteous. He can't take sin before him. Therefore, he's not going to use sin or any form of evil to tempt you or anyone else for that matter. Remember that. Now, if we had not been told at the start of the chapter what God was about to do, I suspect, like Abraham, we'd have thought that this was God calling Abraham for a chat. To Abraham, there would appear nothing sinister in this at all. Nothing sinister. He wouldn't have thought that God was up to anything. You see, this is not the first time God has called on his name. Absolutely not. In chapter 12, we read, God first calls him. In chapter 13 and verse 14, we see the Lord said to Abraham. At the start of chapter 15, the Lord tells Abraham not to fear. Chapter 17 starts with the Lord once again speaking to Abraham. Chapters 18 and 21 are no different. This calling out by God for Abraham would certainly not be surprising or unexpected to Abraham. Far from it. It would not surprise me if he was actually waiting for God to call on him, waiting to hear God's voice at any moment. What must it be like to hear God's voice? What must it be like to hear God's voice? Be sure this morning Billy Graham is getting to hear God's voice. What must it be like? Exciting, exhilarating, frightening, all in one go. That's what I would imagine. Abraham's response to this, here I am. Now, if there was ever an understated response, then this is it. Here I am. Here's the question for us, though. Abraham is expecting to hear God's voice. But are we expecting to hear God's voice? Are we even listening? Are we expecting to hear God's voice? When I was studying for this, that was the question that came to me. And it's one of those moments when you take a big, deep breath. You gulp, in fact. Oof. And I sat there for a few moments. And in the realization, I suddenly realized I am not expecting to hear God's voice. Am I prepared for that still, small voice? The Lord doesn't bawl and shout, doesn't stamp his feet. He's anything but. He's the complete opposite of that. In 1 Kings 19 and 12, we read from the King James Version, which I'm going to read to you now, when God spoke and instructed Elijah. This is what he had to say. And he said, go forth and stand upon the mount before the Lord, and behold, the Lord passed by, and in a great and strong wind rent the mountains and brake in pieces the rock before the Lord. But the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind, an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake, a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after the fire, a still, small voice. Through all that the world throws at me, am I listening for the Lord? Or am I just allowing the world out there just to drown him out? I can't hear him, not even a murmur. Is that what I'm doing? Is that what I'm doing? Now that is a huge question for any Christian to answer. I'll leave that to you to answer for yourself. It's fundamental to our daily walk with him, with God, that we should be listening out for his voice and responding where we hear it. I am talking to myself here as much as I am saying anything to you. Now, this is not just listening with our ears. This is also listening with our eyes. Sorry, Paul. Anatomically, that just doesn't make any sense, does it? Oh, yes, we need to listen with our eyes too, because God speaks to us through his word. God speaks to us through his word, the Bible. Yeah, I read my Bible every day. But am I really reading it, or am I skim reading it just so I can say that I've read my Bible today? Am I listening? Let's get back to our passage. Verse 2 of Genesis 22 says this. God said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains that I shall tell you. This is where it all kicks off. This is where the rubber really hits the road. The test begins. Is it me? Or do you see, as Bob File has said, how absurd or even wicked this sounds? Think about it. Take your son, your only son, whom you love. This goes against all human instinct to protect your children, does it not? To put your own life in the line for them and not that they should put theirs in danger for you. It's the complete opposite of how we would think, isn't it? If we're being honest. God makes sure that Abraham completely understands that it's Isaac we're talking about here. Baldwin once again points out there's a threefold description going on. So there's no mistake in what God is saying. Take your son, your only son, whom you love. Very definite, no ambiguity. Yes, Abraham, your son, your boy, Isaac. What you can't miss here is that Abraham does not question. Does not question. No outwardly objection, nor are we told of any inward objection. I'm not sure what I would do in that situation. But here, we're starting to see some stuff going on here. There's complete, utter obedience and faith going on, along with trust. How would you react if that's your child? A child that God promised you, and you had to wait till you were 100 years of age, or 90 if you're a lady, till you was born. Seriously, how are you going to react to that, do you think? Well, I know my weaknesses. I got a pretty good idea how I would react. I'll tell you one thing's for sure, I'm not telling his mother. I'm not going to be doing that. I'm not going to tell his mother I'm about to offer up our boy as a burnt offering. Absolutely not. There's one other thing here, and it's an important thing. And it's a point of language. The Hebrew word for burnt offering is also the same word used for the word Holocaust. Same word. Where have we heard that before? Where have we heard that before? We're talking about the wiping of someone out here, annihilation. Now, getting back to Abraham, he just gets on with it. He's waited till he's 100, till God has promised this heir. His wife's 90 before she has given birth to her son. This is the start of an amazing journey of faith for Abraham. But not just for Abraham, but for Isaac as well. For Isaac too. I also feel sorry for Isaac here. How often have we read this passage and skimmed over Isaac and concentrated all our thoughts on Abraham here? No, I have to say, I put my hands up and admit that. I quite happily have read this numerous occasions and never really thought about Isaac. We give Abraham our complete attention. We see obedience, we see test, but now we start to see obedience. And not just Abraham, but we also see Isaac's obedience too. We see Isaac's obedience too. From verse 3, we see they start the journey. Now, all who are there on that journey know that they're going to offer up a burnt offering. They know what's going to happen. And they have all that they need for the journey. They have all that they need, the wood for the offering. They've taken the fire with them. They've got the knife for the sacrifice and all the rest of it. So they're well equipped. Nothing is missing. But in verses 3 and 4, there are actually two words in each verse. And those two words are the place. The place. What is this place that we're talking about? Well, we know it's Moriah this morning. It's also known as Jerusalem. Here Abraham is going to sacrifice his son. Does this ring any bells about another son sacrificed in Jerusalem at all? The journey was to take a couple of days to get to the place. They've travelled 40 odd miles or so to get to Moriah. And on the third day, Abraham and his son head up toward the mountain. And it's in verse 5 of Genesis 22, we really do see Abraham's obedience here. Then Abraham said to his young men, stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you. Now, normally the word worship would never raise any alarm bells with anyone in here, would it? You wouldn't think to be suspicious or thinking, worship, oh no, worship. No, you wouldn't. It wouldn't scare you or be any way suspicious about it. It wouldn't ring any alarm bells. But on this occasion it should. On this occasion it should ring alarm bells. And why should it do that? Because on this occasion it has a real disturbing and terrifying connotation. Abraham's worship is to slaughter his son. Still, we have no questioning from Abraham. But another question does come to mind. What's sustaining Abraham? What's keeping him going? We'll answer that later. And as we see Abraham's obedience, we also come to see Isaac's obedience too. In verse 7, Isaac asked his dad where the lamb for the sacrifice is coming from. I wonder how painful a question that might have been for Abraham to hear. And in verse 8, we hear this. Abraham answers it. God will provide for himself the lamb for the burnt offering, my son. There is a certainty in Abraham's response, just like there was in verse 5. He said to his men that he and Isaac will return. That same sense of certainty is also present in his response in verse 8. It gives us no reason to doubt in God. Abraham's obedience knows no bounds here. Now in verse 9, we really see Isaac's obedience come to the fore also. Did a good bit of study on this, and it's amongst the theologians and the academics, there's some 30 years or so have passed from when he's birthed until they get to Moriah. So Isaac could be a man just hitting his 30s, slightly older, maybe just slightly younger. His father certainly, they reckon, well into his 130s. He's an old man. They build an altar, and then all of a sudden, Abraham binds his son, ties him up, lays him on top of the wood, on the altar, and they have built the altar they have built for the burnt offering. Now, I'm not sure about you. I'm pretty well certain that Paul Salina's not going to be taking that down if it was me and my dad. I'm pretty certain I could, as a 30-something-year-old man, I reckon I could fend off an old codger at 130 odds without any problem. We see none of this from Isaac. Not even a question of, what are you doing, Dad? What are you doing? But what does come out here, and here all the commentators show, is that Isaac must have shared his father's faith. He must have shared in his father's faith. So much so that he went along and cooperated with him. He submits to the father to the same extent as his father submits to God the Father. Tell me, where else have you saw a son completely submit to his father? Bearing in mind where we're standing at this point. Where else have you seen a son completely submit to his father? So up until now, we've seen Abraham tested. We have the obedience of two men. And now, finally, we see their faith come to the forefront. I asked earlier, what was sustaining Abraham? Well, for that, we need to go back into Genesis 21 and 12. Through Isaac shall your offspring be named. That is what is sustaining Abraham. If this great nation that was promised him in Genesis 12, and then we read about in Genesis 21 and 12, no wonder Abraham's faith is unshakable. Not only his, but his sons too. What Abraham is saying here is quite simply this. If God says it, I believe it. If God says it, I believe it. And I stand by that. If the Bible says it, I believe it. Two things come out of this. As Abraham is about to plunge the knife into his son for the sacrifice, the angel of the Lord steps in. Verse 13. Let me read it again. And Abraham lifted up his eye. Sorry, that's wrong. Verse 11, sorry. Verse 11. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, Abraham, Abraham. And he said, Here I am. Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him. For now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. And Abraham lifted up his eyes, looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. Abraham went, took the ram, and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. We hear the angel of the Lord shout out, and we also hear, he shouted out to stop it, and we also are being told what was provided for the sacrifice. Abraham is rewarded for his faith by God providing the ram. But Isaac is also rewarded because he gets to hear the voice of the angel of the Lord. He also gets to experience the wonder of God's grace at first hand. He gets to experience God's grace at first hand. He gets to experience what is known as substitutionary salvation. In other words, something else took his place. Something else took his place. Does this ring any bells? Is it ringing any bells yet? For Abraham and Isaac, it was a lamb. For us, that lamb today is no less than Jesus Christ. Jesus Christ. That's who our lamb is today. The Son of God became that very same lamb that took our place. The sacrificial system that was at work within the Jewish nation, a perfect lamb had to be sacrificed and its blood was used to cover the sins of the nation. God sent His Son to be just that lamb for us. Today we've seen how God used testing to build up Abraham, but also his son. We see how both men were truly obedient and how faithful they were to God. And that faith they showed can be ours also, can be yours also. For those of us that are Christians here this morning, I don't believe an explanation or a challenge is required from me. But if you're here today, friend, and you're wondering what made Abraham and Isaac so obedient and so faithful, it is simply this. That God showed that what He says, He does. And He sent His Son as a perfect lamb to be sacrificed on the cross for all our sin. Indeed, John the Baptist said this. John the Baptist was, of course, Jesus' cousin. John chapter 1, verse 29. This is what John the Baptist said. The next day, he, John the Baptist, saw Jesus coming toward them, and he said, "Behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sins of the world." The Lamb's blood used to cleanse us from our sin, to provide a new start, to have that sin removed from us. You too, like Isaac, can have God's wonderful grace in your life. But that can only happen by accepting Jesus Christ. By accepting that He is the Son of God. By accepting He came to take my sin, your sin away. He came to save you and I. Tell me, friend, are you willing to come off the world's altar? Are you willing to come off the world's altar and step into a new life with God? And as we close, let me quote Billy Graham to you. The Apostle Paul said, "Be not conformed to this world." These words cut like a sharp sword across our way of life. They have the tone of a battle call in them. They separate the weak from the strong, but they are words of inspiration, and we need to hear them today. Let me ask you once again, friend, are you willing to come off the world's altar? An altar that will sacrifice you to it. But by coming off that altar and giving yourself to Jesus, you will have life and life to the full. Are you willing to come off the world's altar? Martin and the band are going to come to us now and going to lead us in one final hymn, and then if we please remain standing for the final benediction. Thank you.